We're going to go ahead and record this session. My name is Jenny Lobb, and I am the Family and Consumer Sciences educator in Franklin County. I am a registered dietitian by training. So I would like to welcome you to this second session in our Overcoming Pandemic Paralysis series, where we will be talking specifically about Quarantine 15. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's a hashtag that is used to describe weight gain that some have experienced during the pandemic. And I do want to recognize up front that that this is not a universal phenomenon. So I say weight gain that some have experienced, because for the reason I was asking you to share your favorite new hobbies in the chat box as we were waiting to get started was that for some, the pandemic actually provided the opportunity for some to establish some new healthy habits, maybe being more physically active, using what was a commute time for physical activity, or doing more home cooking. So Amy, I hope I hope I'm not going to embarrass her here, but she actually lost weight during the pandemic. And so I recall a conversation that happened between the two of us and another colleague back in December, where she shared how she had lost weight because she'd been doing all this home cooking. And our colleague said, well, I think I found the weight you lost, because for our other colleague, the hobby that she picked up was baking. So people have tried a variety of things during the pandemic, some habits certainly being healthier than others. However, we do know that about 2/3 of adults, at least according to a survey conducted by the American Psychological Association on pandemic stress, about 2/3 of American adults did gain weight during the pandemic. And actually a study that was published very recently in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that between February and June of last year, the average American adult gained 1.5 pounds a month, which is pretty significant. That adds up to almost 10 pounds in 6 months and almost 20 in a full year, considering that we've been living in this pandemic for a year at this point. So we are going to talk about Quarantine 15 today, and I do want to revisit some of the key points from last week because I have framed this topic to bring what Shannon shared last week about overcoming pandemic paralysis, and using these to apply them specifically to Quarantine 15. So if you missed her talk last week, that's totally fine. You will still benefit from the information today. I don't think you will really miss anything, but if you did attend the talk last week, I'm hoping that you can take what Shannon shared and apply that specifically to this topic. So last week, Shannon talked about solution-focused thinking, focusing on solutions and what you can do, what is in your control, rather than problems and what you can't do. She talked about chunking your time. And today I'll talk about not necessarily chunking your time, but chunking your goals. Last week, Shannon talked about dealing with emotions. That'll come into play a little bit here as we talk about naming emotions that may lead us to eat when we're not necessarily hungry. And then she also talked about finding your purpose and setting goals. Today, I'm going to talk about whether or why to worry about Quarantine 15, some steps you can take to overcome pandemic paralysis to start shedding your Quarantine 15 if you're in that place, and where to locate resources that can help make healthy eating easier wherever you happen to be at this point in time. And we are actually going to launch a poll before I go any farther. And so I would like to hear from you whether you think quarantine is a matter of concern. And you can choose yes, it does worry me, or no, I don't think it's a big deal. And as you're voting, I'll share that the reason I inserted this poll is because you may or may not realize this. When this hashtag first came about, it was actually a little bit controversial, and it did receive some backlash from health professionals who said, we're experiencing an extraordinary amount of stress in this time, and that comfort eating and baking and so forth serve as coping strategies. And it's really not good to mess with people's coping mechanisms when we're dealing with so much stress. And in addition, preoccupation with dieting or body image is not good for one's mental or physical health. And as a dietitian, I would certainly agree with that. It's important to have coping mechanisms when we're dealing with stress. It's not good to be preoccupied with dieting or obsessed over body image. But I do think that there is reason to be worried about quarantine 15. And it looks like most of you agree with that. A few of you said, no, you don't think it's a big deal. And that's totally fine. I'm going to share some information today that may sway you in that direction, but if not, then hopefully you'll still take some information away that'll help you establish healthy eating habits, no matter where you happen to be at this point in time. So I do think that quarantine 15 is worth addressing because, first of all, the food that we consume for comfort in stressful times tends to be high in calories and low in nutritional value. So if you think about a time when you are feeling stressed, you're probably not going to sit on the couch and binge on a bag of baby carrots or go and fix yourself a lovely salad, right? It's typically the chips and the cookies and even alcohol that we turn to when we're trying to cope with stress through food. And those foods and beverages tend to be high in calories, high in sugar, high in salt, with very little nutrients to nourish our bodies. And we know that what we eat, the food choices that we make, can help or hinder our immune function. Foods that are rich in vitamins and minerals can support our immune function. But foods that don't have much nutritional value and just contribute calories to our body, energy to our body without those nutrients, can lead to excess weight, which is associated with chronic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, and so forth. And we also know that diet is certainly associated with those diseases. There's been a lot of research emerging in the last month or two, even about the relationship between obesity and COVID-19 specifically. And the World Obesity Federation came out and said that after advanced age, obesity is actually the second greatest predictor of whether someone will get seriously sick or even die from COVID-19. And in some states, unlike in Ohio, where they've prioritized the vaccine rollout based on age, in some states, obesity has been one of those priority factors where people are able to get the vaccine sooner based on their weight status, because it is such a significant predictor. So knowing this, what are some things that we can do to start moving toward making healthier choices? If you feel like you've slipped into some less than healthy habits, you may feel like you're in a rut, you may be feeling that pandemic paralysis, but you know that it's time to make some changes for the better, specifically in regard to your diet. Well, the first thing I would suggest would be to simply adopt a positive perspective, which means rather than giving in to quarantine 15 as inevitable and accepting that weight gain as inevitable, look at the pandemic, look at your current circumstances as an opportunity to change your routine or establish some new habits. And this is where that piece about starting with what you can do, as Shannon talked about last week, comes into play. Because there are certainly many, many things that are still out of our control. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now and in our day-to-day lives. But what I'd encourage you to do is think about your own home environment or your work environment. Think about your own routine and what you could do today or this week to move in the right direction. Last week, Shannon talked about chunking your time. What I want to suggest today is starting small by chunking your goals. So maybe weight loss could be a big end goal for you, but can you break that down into smaller, more achievable steps and pick something that you can do, something that you could start today or this week to move in that direction? So for example, maybe you could find and make a new recipe that features fruits and vegetables. And I'll give you some suggestions, some resources for that here in a moment. Or maybe you could start reading nutrition labels, looking at the calories, looking at the sugar, not necessarily even tracking it yet, but just getting in the habit of looking at those to see what you're putting into your body. Or maybe it's keeping a food diary. And I don't necessarily, again, mean tracking. That might be a next step. But what I'm talking about here is journaling when and where and how you're feeling when you eat. Because in the nutrition world, we talk as dietitians about our cues. What are our internal and external cues that lead us to eat? Our internal cues are our body's hunger and fullness, our hunger and satiety cues, where our bodies let us know when to eat because we're hungry and when to stop because we're full. We all have those internal cues, but the reality is there are a lot of external cues that lead us to eat when we may or may not actually be hungry. Those are things like habits and routines, maybe the time of day, or being in a certain place. Maybe there's things in your environment that cue you to eat, whether because it's just a routine that you walk through the kitchen or you drive a certain route and stop and get a snack. Or it could be just the appearance of something that looks appealing or is convenient and easy to grab. And of course, it can be our feelings as well. So in addition to where and when we're eating, you might start to note how you're feeling. Are you bored? Are you stressed? And if so, is there maybe an alternate activity you could do rather than eating to help process through that feeling? Or are you truly hungry? Once you've kind of started to identify those cues, something you can do is to modify your environment, the things that are in your control, to set yourself up for success. So for example, are there sugary cereals or snacks that are on top of your refrigerator or your kitchen counter that tempt you to eat? Or is there a nice bowl of fruit? Or when you open your fridge, are there healthy snacks that are ready to grab? Things you want the healthy stuff to be easy, convenient, right up front. And then you want to keep the stuff that's not so healthy out of sight, like in a closed cabinet or in your pantry, or even out of the house altogether if you're able to. If you are still working from home, something that could be helpful is setting times to go down to the kitchen to get a meal or snack, so you're not tempted to pass through the kitchen multiple times and graze throughout the day. That may or may not be your reality right now. Regardless, also taking time to plan ahead so that you do have a well-stocked kitchen, or so you do have meals and snacks ready to go when you're hungry, can help you stick to your plan over time. So if we know that if you plan meals and make a list, you may be more likely to prepare and eat those healthy meals because you don't want the food that you've bought to go to waste. For some, online grocery shopping can be a helpful strategy because it's a way to avoid the temptation of going into the store and maybe getting those impulse buys that you don't want in your house. You could, you want to make sure, even if you do plan meals, to keep a well-stocked pantry, having things like your frozen vegetables or canned vegetables and some whole grains on hand, some things you could use together to throw together a healthy meal in a pinch if your plans go astray and you find that you're hungry but don't have the meal that you had perhaps planned for the week. So those are some tips if you're looking for a way to just get started. A first step you could take to maybe break out of your rut and move in the direction of healthier eating, establishing a new habit or a new routine. I mentioned I would share some resources for some new recipes. If you would like, again, I'll invite you to open up that chat box and share some of your favorite recipes, especially maybe new ones that you have tried during the pandemic. I always love hearing and finding new recipes. Celebrate Your Plate is one resource you could use if you're not familiar with that one. It's an initiative of the Ohio SNAP Ed program that helps Ohioans make healthy food and lifestyle choices on a budget. So there are many recipes on there that are easy, budget friendly, that feature fruits and vegetables. Food Hero is another one. It's similar to Celebrate Your Plate, but it comes from our friends at another OSU, Oregon State University. And then My Plate Kitchen, the My Plate website just got a redesign, so that one might be worth checking out if you haven't been there in a while. As an alternate to perhaps trying a new recipe, maybe something to consider is trying a new way to prepare fruits and vegetables. So we know that when you're learning something new, there are actually different pathways, neurons lit up in your brain, and that can be a nice way to kind of break out of a rut just by trying or learning something new. And I know I've been experimenting with my air fryer and with the Instant Pot throughout the past year. So maybe, trying a new cooking method, trying a new appliance could be a fun way to try something new that's also healthy. I do want to mention a series of short videos a colleague of mine have put together on growing and harvesting and cooking fresh, locally grown vegetables. And we've done these using different cooking methods. So we've done grilling summer squash and corn. We used an air fryer to make sweet potatoes and a dehydrator to make kale chips. All of these videos are on the OSU Extension Franklin County YouTube channel, as well as the Growing Franklin blog. So I encourage you to check those out if you're interested, or if you want to learn more, kind of take a deeper dive into any of these cooking methods, please feel free to reach out to me for more information if you have questions about air frying or dehydrating, for example. I do see a couple of comments coming into the chat box. So keto cheese, vegetarian meatballs, those both sound very creative. Grilled chicken, marinated in garlic with sweet potatoes and Brussels sprouts, yum. So lots of creative recipes that you guys are trying this past year. If you are perhaps ready to take a second step, so if you've taken these initial steps, you're looking for the next step, perhaps some more support or additional resources, you could get into tracking your food intake using an app like MyFitnessPal or the new MyPlate app. We do know that in regard to weight loss, tracking your food intake is is the gold standard method if you are wanting to lose weight, actually paying attention to what you're putting in your body and staying within your calorie needs to get all the nutrition needs you need without excess calories is the best way to go about weight loss. So if you're ready to take that step, I would recommend one of those apps. Looking into a health coaching program or getting connected with a dietitian. Here at Ohio State, we have some wonderful resources, including both individual and group health coaching programs for faculty and staff. So maybe where you work, there are similar programs if you're not with Ohio State. That could be something to look into, as is checking with your physician's office for a referral to a dietitian if you're wanting some additional support in regard to goal setting or creating a personalized meal plan. And then there are always accountability groups as an option, maybe a local Weight Watchers group or joining a Facebook group for accountability and recipe sharing and so forth. So there are additional resources out there as you're ready to take that next step. So in summary, what I want to encourage you all to do this next week is to adopt a positive perspective so that you can overcome pandemic paralysis and approach your quarantine 15. To chunk your goals and celebrate small achievements like finding and trying new recipes. Identify your cues and modify your environment to set yourself up for success. And then seek out additional support as you're ready. I do want to encourage you to come back next week to hear Patrice talk about gardening as a self-care practice. But with that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have for me today. I'm also happy to answer questions that you want to ask privately if you want to give me an email or a phone call. And I do want to encourage you to check out our blog if you're not familiar with that, livehealthyosu.com. I recently wrote an article on this topic on quarantine 15. Shannon wrote an article on overcoming pandemic paralysis. And then another one that I wrote back in December that may be of interest is overcoming cooking fatigue. So that's an additional resource if you're not familiar with it. But I did leave some time today for questions, so I'll hang on until 11:30 or until we've got any questions answered. And if you don't have any questions, I thank you for joining and hope you have a wonderful week.